First things first, here's a brief crash course on some of the terms I'll be using a lot. This is a face. It's typically composed of 4 sides. I often use the words face and polygon interchangeably. Each side of a face is called an edge. At the beginning and end of each edge is a vertex, which is the smallest component of a model. The plural for vertex is vertices, which is another word I'll use a lot. You can manipulate the geometry of a model at any of these levels, whether you shift faces around, or edges, or vertices. Lastly, the mesh, or model, is any given object you're modeling. Today I'm modeling a skull. It's a piece of a sword that I'm making alterations to. Here's a clip of the sword I originally made. It's very low poly, meaning I didn't model it with many polygons, so it has a rough, boxy look, typically appropriate for video games. Today I'm redoing the skull and other elements of the sword in order to elevate the look a bit. What I'm doing here is, it's kind of like a sketch, but in the 3D space. I'm making polygons that trace the profile of the skull and then separate meshes that trace the front and back and any other notable features. So under Mesh Tools, I select Create Polygon and set down 4 points. Then again under Mesh Tools, I select Append to Polygon so that I can continue adding faces to the original polygon and get a good outline going. So all these meshes are separate from each other, and I'll ultimately have to connect all the pieces to result in just one mesh. Before I connect them all, I need to shape the meshes better according to the other views. What I'm doing here is that, although I fitted this mesh to follow along with the profile, it doesn't follow along with the shape of the front of the face. So I'm grabbing the edges so I can align them with the front view, side view, and back view wherever applicable. Now I'm going through kind of blocking out the teeth and a section of the jaw that creates a cavity. It's kind of just like sketching it out, like I said before. It's not something that's going to be final, it's really just so I can feel out how it's going to look by blocking out the general shape. Later on you'll see, I wasn't totally sure what to do with the jaw. Throughout this process, I wrestled with wanting to create a vaguely accurate looking skull, but not wanting it to be an anatomically correct skull. Since it's a fixture that goes onto a sword, it's more that, in the world of this sword, it's something a sculptor or an artist made as they made this sword. So it's not an actual skull, and I'm not trying to be the most correct about it, so I take some liberties with the details. So yeah, things I'm doing with the jaw later on, you'll see I have kind of a struggle with what anatomically correct structural designs to include versus what details I can leave out. Now I'm going through and combining these meshes to each other, so that way I'll have an outline that's one single piece. I'm using the bridge tool a lot. I just select one edge, then another desired edge, then hit Shift, right click, then select bridge, and bridge them together. Now I'm trying to make it so the eyes and all those extra pieces will be part of the main mesh so I can start filling in these holes. But first I want to start with something of a clean slate, so I delete all the faces on the left side of the skull, then align all the vertices to the center. I do this by selecting a vertex, and with the Move tool engaged, I hold down the X key and it'll automatically snap to the center when I drag it. So now I have half of the skull that I'm going to spruce up. Later on, I'll mirror this geometry so I won't have to do the same work twice. Now I'm going to proceed with filling in these gaps and making it into a solid piece. What I like to do is create these big straps kinda by bridging one edge to another, trying to make it flow nicely, especially around the eyes. What I'm doing here now is, I've bridged across all these different sections of the mesh, and now I'm filling in these holes. I do this by selecting a closed loop of edges, then I hit Shift, right click, and drag the mouse down, then select Fill Hole, which creates one appropriately sized face where the hole used to be. In this case, it's a polygon that has a lot of edges on it. The thing is, when modeling, you're always fighting against triangles and faces that have more than 4 sides, so I have to take care in how I'll split up this giant polygon I've just created. Sometimes it can be kind of a hassle because I'll end up with a triangle and then I'll have to come up with a creative solution to make it into a 4-sided face, so it's just like a puzzle. So right now I'm going through and doing this as roughly as I want, and you'll see it looks really sloppy, and it's because I'm going to go through and fix it later on, so there won't be any triangles, and so it'll flow really well. I'm doing this thing here where I filled in all these holes, the mesh is all one piece now. What I want to do is use some sculpting tools to add volume to the model and to relax the geometry. The relax tool specifically is kind of magic because you run it all along the mesh and it'll spread out the vertices in a really comfortable way. So it'll be more evened out and I'll be able to smooth things over really nicely. Now what I've got here is an error I'm going to encounter a few times before I really figure out how to solve it. What's happening is I've got an error saying that sculpting cannot be performed on non-manifold geometry, and I've got to perform a mesh cleanup. So I figured it meant, oh, you've got a whole bunch of triangles in your work, we're not gonna let you smooth that over. Spoiler alert, I was actually wrong about that, so you'll see later on I have to come up with a different solution, but for now I'm thinking, oh, it probably has to do with all the triangles and other polygons with more than 4 sides. So I select the model, I go to the Mesh menu, then select Cleanup. I adjust the settings so it'll select all faces that are 4 sides. That way, all the good faces are selected. Then holding down the Shift key, I move to select the entire mesh. That way, any of the faces that were previously selected will become unselected, and anything that wasn't selected before is now selected. That means all the triangles and other bad faces, they're now selected. Then I'll usually press delete to get rid of those faces. That way I can have these blank areas to really indicate where I've messed up and where I need to go back and rework things so everything will be 4-sided faces. Again, for this process I use the bridge tool or the fill hole tool. If I end up with a face that is more than 4 sides, I'll usually go to the mesh tools menu and use the multi-cut tool in order to cut a large face into smaller faces. So right here, I finally have a solid mesh that's composed of only 4-sided polygons. Now I'm trying again to use the sculpt geometry tool so I can smooth out the mesh, but it's not working, so I googled the error I got, which again was that sculpting can't be performed on non-manifold geometry. I find some video that explains it kind of, but I don't think I'm working through the same issue that the other person was trying to solve. So I kind of wing it. I do this thing that's kind of imperceptible. There's this thing I noticed early on when creating the meshes, that some of the meshes didn't exactly connect to each other. I noticed some parts where even if the faces appeared to be joined, they didn't actually share any vertices. So I thought I'd solve that issue as I filled in all the gaps in the model and removed all the incorrect faces, but clearly I hadn't. So that's why the sculpting tool wasn't working for me. It's because the mesh wasn't joined together. What I'm doing is trying to identify where the vertices aren't connected to each other. I keep jumping over to a smooth shaded view, just trying to see if I can see any odd deformations in the edges, and I'm identifying some. I'm just kind of doing this by eye, moving around some vertices that I think are going to be a problem area, and then merging those disconnected vertices together. I didn't think it was going to work, but who knew? When I tried to use the sculpt geometry tool again, it actually worked out. So I was able to spot each of the sections that were messed up and I fixed them. Now that I'm able to use the sculpt geometry tool, I start puffing out areas that need some volume, then go through and smooth everything over so it'll flow nicer. After that, I move all the vertices back to the center because those got shifted when I relaxed the geometry. Then I'm going to mirror the geometry so I can really get a grasp on what's up. Now I'm going to fix the shape of the volume and then tweak things a lot until things start to make sense. Something you'll see me doing a lot is getting rid of some of the definition, because some sections are really defined just because I was trying to get rid of triangles, which is not really to the benefit of the model itself, so I'm just going through and amending that. A way that I'm getting rid of some definition is by collapsing edges. What you do is you select an edge or a row of edges like I'm doing, and you hold down Shift, right-click, drag your mouse down, then there's an option called Merge/Collapse Edges. You toggle over that and it'll bring you to another set of options where you'll then select Collapse Edge. And don't worry, if you want to do a bunch of these in a row, you don't have to go through that whole rigmarole each time. You can just hit the G key and it'll repeat the last action. I'm able to get rid of entire rows of unnecessary edges by collapsing them in that way. You can see I'm kind of fussing around with the teeth and jaw area, and this is something I end up scrapping almost entirely because it just doesn't work, and I just had to block it in to feel it out. What I'm doing now, like the reason there's this orangish, reddish gradient effect on these lines now, is because I engaged soft selection. You can do this by hitting B on the keyboard, and you're able to adjust how expansive the soft selection will be, how much area it will encompass. I usually do it just to expand a few vertices out. It just means that instead of moving just one singular vertex or other component, you also move a few of the vertices around it. In general, what you're seeing here is just hours and hours of fiddling, and this is kind of typical of 3D modeling. There was this time when I first started modeling that I spent about 20 hours altogether modeling a hand in detail because I really wanted to make a good detailed hand. So yeah, taking a chunk of hours to model out a skull, not even an especially detailed skull, isn't out of the ordinary. As I practice, I get better and it takes less time, but this is kind of something you've got to be prepared to spend time molding. Here I'm adding some definition to the concave areas next to the eyes. What I do is I select the faces I want, then I hit Shift right click, then I select Extrude Face. Next I push inward just slightly, then use the scale tool to make the faces just a little bit smaller. I'm doing an important step here with the nose and eye cavities, and a reason it took me so long to get to this step is again having to do with that struggle of this isn't a real skull, this is meant to be a sculpture of a skull. So these nose and eye cavities, they're not going to be hollow, they're going to be filled in. Even if they're concave, I need to define some geometry inside of them. Here's where things get brought back into perspective. See, that's the skull I used to have, the really low poly one, and this is the skull I've decided to replace it with. And I'm trying to think of a good way to bring it back into the rest of the sword, and I realized that this new skull brings about an entirely different aesthetic. So I can't just, cut and paste, I've got to adjust things a lot. So I start by tweaking the handle a good measure. Okay, moment of truth. This is where I connect the top of the skull with the handle of the sword. It was a bit of a challenge trying to connect these guys because the number of edges on each section didn't match each other perfectly. So this was another game of, okay, let's see how you connect these without creating any triangles. And you'll see, it's really just like doing a puzzle. You just have to carefully execute it and, trial and error. What I really didn't want to do was add any more definition to either of these two objects, so I really wanted it to be an even matchup, which after a lot of fussing around, I managed to pull off. For the longest time when I was adding all these details and frills to the handle and the sword, I was avoiding connecting the base of the skull to the blade because I wanted to make those curves that you see on the original skull. I really wanted to include that, and so I spent a while fussing around with it trying to figure it out. But after a while I see that the handle and the crossguard at the top of the skull look a bit like a top hat, and that anything I tried to add to the base of the skull looked kind of like a bow tie or the collar of a coat. It just could have easily veered into giving off Jack Skellington vibes, which I wanted to avoid. Right now I'm preparing the base of the skull to connect with the sword. And the thing is, there's a lot of definition of the skull and really not that much of the sword. But it all turns out okay. I do this trick where I connect the two respective vertices at the very front of each mesh and the ones at the very back. This is to ensure it's split evenly down the middle and the model will be symmetrical. Then I go through grabbing trios of vertices from the skull and merging them together, and then merging that new vertex with one from the sword. And I do that a bunch of times, and you might see that I'm creating a whole bunch of triangles by doing this. The thing is though, that when you merge 3 vertices together, it does create 2 triangles. But when you delete the edge between those 2 triangles, that leaves you with a square. So it's a really great way of creating a natural transition between a high poly object to a low poly object that you want to be all in one mesh. I finished modeling everything, and now I'm going to proceed with UVing it. For UV mapping, I make cuts in the model so I can separate every single section of the model in UV mode while still preserving the model itself. I'll unfold all the segments in UV mode so I can view them on a flat 2D surface, which I'll ultimately export out so I can do my texturing, also called surfacing. Each of these flat pieces here has a corresponding segment on the 3D model, so when I add color to this 2D image later on, I can reconnect this image to the model and the 3D model will then be colored in. Here I'm laying things out so it'll make sense when I go ahead and texture it, really just making sure that everything is an appropriate size. Then I save a PNG of these UVs and open it up in Photoshop. You might be able to tell that I really didn't know what color scheme to go for here. So this is my process. I just drop in color knowing that probably nothing from my first go round will be the same by the end. After that first draft, I applied that texture to the model and took a look at how it all vibed together, and it did not vibe. It was very sloppy looking, which is kind of the point though, just to throw spaghetti at the wall. So to figure out how to texture everything, I kept thinking, in the fiction of this sword, what would the skull be chipped out of? And I thought, you know what, jade would be a really pretty option. And so I decided that the skull and the surrounding area could be made out of jade. I wrestled so much with the blade itself, because I didn't know if I wanted to have details of chips and nicks. By the end, I decided it would be best to go for a really smooth, sleek look. Okay, so here comes the final edit. The jade texture I'd made before really quickly, it looked pretty sloppy, so I needed to just do one with a little more finesse. So this is all wrapped up. Just as a refresher, here again is what I started with. It's something that was really low poly, and the funny thing is that even though I wanted to make edits to it, when I first made it and rendered out a turntable, I was pretty happy with how it looked. It has an aesthetic that I do like. It's something that I think could be used for an online RPG or something in that vein, so it has its uses and its charm, but I just felt like it didn't really challenge me very much, and I wanted to do something that was a little sleeker. So fast forward, and this is what we've got now. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. It has more definition, but still has some of the rustic charm from the original, which I'm so into. I'm very happy with the floral design on the crossguard and how sleek it all looks. And now that I've finished all the edits on this sword and have two versions of it, I can see the positives of both models. There's something about the original sword that just has so much character, and the way I rendered the turntable was really fun because the gem in the eyes look so sparkly and alive. And I'd spent a lot of time texturing the original sword and really liked how the skull's texture turned out for how low poly it was. So I think it has a lot of virtues, but I'm so happy with the new version. Like, the skull's just so pretty, and I had such a nice time making it. Altogether, it was a fun experiment, and I'm happy with the final product. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll be back with another video next week.